Ladies and gentlemen, fellow citizens and partners around the world, today I want to address a matter of great importance and offer clarity on a step taken by the former President of the United States. In an effort to reaffirm America's commitment to diplomacy, mutual respect, and global cooperation, a special envoy was dispatched to extend an official message of goodwill and reconciliation. This gesture is not merely symbolic, it is substantive. It reflects a recognition that while history may be marked by moments of disagreement or misunderstanding, leadership calls for the courage to face those moments with honesty and humility. The decision to send an envoy was driven by a desire to heal, to rebuild bridges that may have been strained, and to reinforce the value of strong, principled relationships with global partners. We live in a time when actions speak louder than words. Sending an envoy is a reminder that dialogue is always more powerful than silence, that engagement is always more productive than estrangement. This step, taken in good faith, is about owning responsibility where necessary and demonstrating that American leadership does not shy away from making amends when it serves the greater cause of peace and international cooperation. The message delivered was one of respect, of acknowledgement, and of hope. It carried with it a commitment to the shared ideals of sovereignty, dignity, and mutual advancement. It was an assurance that no matter the complexities of the past, the future holds space for understanding, partnership, and shared progress. Let this moment stand not only as an act of reconciliation, but also as a lesson in leadership, that admitting when something must be set right is not weakness, but strength. And that in doing so, we show the world what real diplomacy looks like. In the realm of international diplomacy, actions often speak louder than words. When a former US president makes the decision to send an envoy to another nation, it is not done lightly. It is a calculated and meaningful act, one that carries with it the weight of intention, symbolism, and purpose. This particular gesture, made in the spirit of goodwill and reconciliation, sends a clear and powerful message to the global community. The United States remains committed to respectful, principled engagement with other nations, regardless of past misunderstandings or tensions. The decision to dispatch a personal representative reflects a recognition of the importance of diplomacy as a living, dynamic process. Relationships between nations are not static. They evolve, experience challenges, and require attention and care to thrive. Sending an envoy is an acknowledgement that something in the relationship needed to be addressed, and more importantly, that it deserved to be addressed with sincerity and care. In a world where miscommunication and mistrust can escalate quickly, such an act stands as a proactive move to de-escalate, to clarify intentions, and to build or rebuild a foundation of trust. This was not a move driven by politics or short-term gains. Rather, it was guided by the broader principle that the United States has a responsibility, as a global leader, to uphold the values of mutual respect, dignity, and open communication. When tensions rise, or when words or actions are perceived as disrespectful or dismissive, it is the duty of leaders to respond not with silence or defensiveness, but with clarity and humility. The sending of an envoy is a rare but potent demonstration of this approach. It says, without using force or coercion, that the relationship matters and that steps are being taken to restore it. Furthermore, the envoy's mission was not only symbolic, but also practical. Behind the gesture lies an understanding that personal diplomacy, face-to-face conversation, sincere apologies if warranted, and an open channel for listening can often achieve what public statements and policy briefings cannot. It personalizes the relationship between nations. It humanizes it. When two parties sit down across from each other, even after a period of tension, there is an opportunity for real understanding to emerge. The envoy, carrying a direct message from the former president, was there to convey not only words but intent, tone, and sincerity that are sometimes lost in official communiques. It is also important to recognize the broader implications of such a move. When a high-profile figure takes the step of sending a representative to offer a gesture of goodwill, it sets a precedent. It signals to the world that reconciliation is not weakness, and that humility in leadership is a strength. It tells allies and adversaries alike that the United States values its relationships and is willing to invest in them, not just when it is convenient, but especially when it is difficult. It reinforces a model of leadership that values respect over dominance, dialogue over confrontation, and long-term stability. The envoy's visit was about more than just fixing a particular incident or addressing a specific misunderstanding. It was about resetting the tone of the relationship. It was about the basic principles of engagement, mutual respect, recognition of sovereignty, and the importance of continued cooperation. These principles are not optional. They are the foundation of a stable and peaceful international order. By taking the first step, the former president underscored the belief that the United States does not stand above the world, but within it, as part of a global community that depends on cooperation, diplomacy, and trust. This gesture will be remembered not because it was dramatic or headline-grabbing, but because it reflected a deeper truth about responsible leadership. It showed that the former president, despite being out of office, understood the power of reconciliation and the necessity of keeping channels of communication open. In a time when diplomacy is often overshadowed by confrontation, this act served as a reminder that genuine efforts to make amends and rebuild relationships still have a place, and an essential one, in the conduct of foreign affairs. Ultimately, the sending of the envoy was a meaningful demonstration of how diplomacy should work, with integrity, courage, and a deep commitment to the idea that no relationship is beyond repair as long as there is a willingness to engage with honesty and respect. In international relations, the ability to acknowledge past missteps is not just a matter of courtesy, it is a crucial element of responsible leadership. When a former US president sends an envoy to address a strained diplomatic relationship, the underlying message is clear. Mistakes may have been made, tensions may have risen, but they are not being ignored. This kind of action reflects a deeper awareness that relationships between nations, like those between individuals, require honesty, humility, and accountability to endure and prosper. Acknowledging that past interactions may have caused strain is an act of maturity. It does not weaken a nation's position, rather it strengthens its moral authority. In this particular instance, the decision to send an envoy was a deliberate effort to take ownership of the impact that previous words or actions may have had. Whether the strain arose from rhetoric, policy decisions, or perceived disrespect, the former president's gesture speaks to an understanding that it is not enough to move forward while pretending nothing happened. Healing and progress require acknowledgement first. Such acknowledgement is often the hardest step to take. In the fast-paced world of politics and diplomacy, it is easy to justify, to explain away, or to simply ignore moments that caused offense or harm. But doing so erodes trust over time. When a world leader, especially one from a country as influential as the United States, chooses instead to confront those moments with honesty, it resets the tone of the conversation. It creates space for reconciliation. It tells the other party that their concerns, their pride, and their dignity matter. That message is powerful in any context, but especially so in diplomacy, where relationships are often defined as much by tone as by policy. Responsibility in this sense does not mean accepting blame for everything that has gone wrong. It means acknowledging the role one may have played in contributing to tensions. It is a sign that the former president understands that diplomacy is not just about asserting interests, but also about listening and responding to how actions are received. Taking responsibility does not weaken one's negotiating position. In fact, it can strengthen it by showing that engagement is rooted in respect and fairness, not arrogance or dismissal. This approach also has practical consequences. When a leader recognizes past missteps, it opens the door for renewed dialogue. It removes barriers that may have been hardened by resentment or frustration. By sending a representative to express this acknowledgement face-to-face, the former president ensured that the message was not reduced to a public statement or media soundbite. It became personal, thoughtful, and intentional. That kind of gesture can turn a page in a relationship that may otherwise remain stuck in a cycle of misunderstanding or mistrust. The importance of this act extends beyond the immediate parties involved. It sets an example for how international disagreements should be handled, not with stubborn silence or escalating rhetoric, but with humility and willingness to take the first step. It shows that even high-level leadership is not exempt from accountability, and that message resonates globally, particularly in an era when many citizens around the world are of political elites and question whether leaders truly act in good faith. Acknowledging past missteps also paves the way for a more constructive future. It establishes a precedent that mistakes, while inevitable in any complex relationship, do not have to define it. What matters more is how those mistakes are addressed. Are they ignored or are they confronted? Are they buried under pride or are they surfaced with a willingness to repair the damage? In this case, the envoy carried a message that leaned toward healing, showing that the former president prioritized the long-term health of the relationship over short-term image or defensiveness. This kind of diplomatic humility does not come easily, especially for figures accustomed to power and influence. But it is precisely that kind of humility that elevates statesmanship above politics. It is a recognition that international relations are not a zero-sum game, where one side's concession is another's victory. They are ongoing, evolving interactions that require care, flexibility, and, when necessary, a sincere willingness to own up to actions that may have gone too far or been misunderstood. Ultimately, this acknowledgement of past missteps is a testament to the idea that no relationship, however damaged, is beyond repair when there is honesty at the table. It shows that taking responsibility is not a retreat, it is a step forward. And in doing so, it sets the stage for a more respectful, stable, and cooperative future. In the realm of international affairs, where power, pride, and perception often dictate the course of relationships between nations, the commitment to dialogue stands as a vital and often courageous choice. When a former U.S. president sends an envoy to another country, it is not simply a procedural or symbolic act. It is a deliberate move to reopen lines of communication, to reaffirm that dialogue is the preferred path over silence, and to signal a readiness to engage constructively rather than retreat into isolation or passive disapproval. This action places value on the belief that differences should not be met with distance, but with discussion. Open dialogue is more than conversation. It is a process of mutual recognition where each party has the opportunity to speak, be heard, and find common ground. In diplomacy, refusing to speak is rarely neutral. It sends a message of dismissal, disregard, or disengagement. And when one nation chooses not to engage, it leaves the other in a position of uncertainty, potentially resentment, and often suspicion. That vacuum of communication becomes fertile ground for misunderstanding and conflict. In contrast, dialogue, especially when initiated after a period of tension, serves as a bridge between conflicting interests and differing worldviews. The move to engage in dialogue through a personal envoy underscores the understanding that relationships are rarely mended by force or silence. Rather, they are repaired through the slow, careful work of conversation. And not just any conversation, but one grounded in respect, honesty, and a shared desire to find solutions. The presence of an envoy bearing a message from a former head of state demonstrates that this is not just about diplomacy as strategy, but diplomacy as relationship building. It shows a recognition that dialogue must be constant even, especially when it is difficult. In a world where global conflicts, ideological divides, and competing interests are the norm, choosing to talk can be seen as a powerful act of leadership. It suggests a confidence in the nation's values and position, strong enough to be shared and debated openly. It is far easier for leaders to entrench themselves in their positions, to avoid risk by avoiding communication. But such a path leads to stalemate and decay in relationships. True diplomacy requires the courage to listen as much as to speak, and the humility to accept that understanding is often the product of shared dialogue, not unilateral declarations. This particular gesture of sending an envoy conveys not just a desire to resolve a specific issue, but a broader statement about the importance of communication in maintaining peace, respect, and partnership. By opening that door again, even after tension or disagreement, it becomes possible to rebuild trust. Dialogue is how grievances are addressed, intentions are clarified, and misunderstandings are corrected. It is also how nations explore new opportunities for cooperation, even after a setback. Furthermore, the commitment to dialogue is not a one-time act. It is a continuing process, one that demands consistency, patience, and sincerity. By re-establishing dialogue through direct engagement, the former president made it clear that communication must remain active and open, not just when things are going well, but also, and more importantly, when relations are under strain. This kind of steadfast commitment is what transforms diplomacy from an occasional tool into a foundational principle of foreign policy. The act also reflects an understanding that silence in moments of tension is not neutral. It can often be interpreted as indifference or worse, contempt. That's why making the decision to speak, not in front of cameras or at podiums, but quietly, respectfully, and directly through a trusted envoy, can be so impactful. It signals not just a willingness to fix things, but a deep respect for the other party's dignity and voice. It also communicates confidence in the value of the relationship itself, demonstrating that the connection is worth maintaining and improving through continued conversation. This form of engagement does not require agreement on all issues. It does not erase past disagreements or guarantee future alignment. What it does offer is a path forward, a way to address concerns, to clear the air, and to reaffirm the shared interests that may still bind the two nations together. Dialogue may not solve everything immediately, but it lays the groundwork for progress. Without it, that progress becomes nearly impossible. By choosing dialogue over disengagement, the former president reinforced a principle that remains at the heart of successful diplomacy: talking is not a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it is one of the clearest signs of strength, stability, and seriousness. It shows a commitment not only to solving problems, but to sustaining a relationship based on mutual respect, ongoing communication, and a shared hope for the future. Trust is the cornerstone of any meaningful relationship, whether between individuals or nations. Without it, cooperation becomes fragile, communication turns cautious, and progress slows to a halt. In the complex world of international affairs, where stakes are high and perceptions matter as much as policies, the restoration of trust becomes both a delicate and essential undertaking. When a former US president sends an envoy with a message of reconciliation, it is not only a diplomatic move, but a deliberate attempt to rebuild trust where it has been strained, to reaffirm that respect and principle still form the foundation of the relationship. Trust, once shaken, does not simply return with time. It must be actively rebuilt through sincere effort, acknowledgement, and consistent actions. The decision to send an envoy is one such action, an intentional step to repair what may have been fractured, whether through misunderstandings, perceived slights, or differing national interests. The former president's gesture signals that the relationship in question still holds value, and that repairing it is a priority worth pursuing. It sends a message that the United States recognizes the need not just for strong alliances, but for respectful and principled ones, grounded in mutual understanding. When relationships falter in diplomacy, it is rarely due to a single event. It is often the result of a series of miscommunications, unmet expectations, or policy moves interpreted as disrespectful or dismissive. In such cases, rebuilding trust requires more than reassurances. It requires action that demonstrates good faith. Sending a representative to convey a message directly, rather than through a press statement or official letter, adds weight to that intention. It shows that the former president did not want to leave any room for ambiguity. The relationship mattered enough to engage personally and respectfully. This kind of effort is not made simply to appease. It is made because long-term partnerships depend on trust. Without it, even well-intentioned policies can be misread. Without it, collaboration on matters such as security, trade, and regional stability becomes hesitant and conditional. Rebuilding trust is therefore not just a moral decision, it is a strategic one. It acknowledges that diplomacy is not only about interests, it is also about relationships, and relationships thrive when there is mutual trust and accountability. The gesture also reinforces the idea that principled relationships are not transactional. They are built on a deeper sense of shared values, on the belief that nations can interact with each other in a way that respects sovereignty, history, and cultural identity. By taking steps to restore trust, the former president reaffirmed that the United States does not seek dominance in its international relationships, but rather mutual respect and cooperation. It was a way of saying, without arrogance or pretense, that mistakes can happen, but they can also be addressed with humility and responsibility. Trust restoration is not immediate. It unfolds over time, shaped by future actions, consistency, and continued engagement. However, what makes this gesture meaningful is that it begins the process. It reopens the door. It shifts the atmosphere from one of distance to one of possibility. And in doing so, it lays the groundwork for a future where the relationship is not defined by past tension, but by renewed understanding and collaboration. Moreover, restoring trust has a ripple effect. When one high-profile leader makes a genuine effort to mend a strained relationship, it sets an example for others. It sends a message to both domestic and international audiences that diplomacy is alive, that bridges can still be built even after they have been weakened. It challenges the growing cynicism in global politics, the idea that countries only act out of self-interest or that pride must always come before peace. Instead, it shows that trust, once lost, can be regained, but only through honest effort and thoughtful action. The choice to engage through dialogue and personal outreach signals a deep commitment to preserving the integrity of the international relationship. It reflects a broader understanding that in an interconnected world, no country truly stands alone. All are part of a global network that functions best when trust is intact. By making a move toward restoring that trust, the former president demonstrated not only a desire to fix a specific issue, but also to strengthen the foundation of cooperation moving forward. Ultimately, the restoration of trust is not about erasing the past. It is about learning from it and choosing to move forward with intention, clarity, and respect. This gesture, quiet, deliberate, and rooted in principle, shows what it looks like when leadership chooses the path of reconciliation over resentment. It is a reminder that trust, though fragile, remains one of the most powerful forces in diplomacy, and that with commitment and sincerity, it can be rebuilt. In the complex landscape of global leadership, strength is often misinterpreted as the refusal to back down, the ability to impose will, or the display of unshakable certainty. Yet real strength, the kind that endures and commands respect, often lies in the less visible acts of accountability. When a former US president chooses to send an envoy to make amends, clarify intentions, or offer respect where it may have been perceived as lacking, it is not an admission of weakness, it is a demonstration of confidence rooted in responsibility. This act frames accountability not as a liability, but as a pillar of authentic and durable leadership. Accountability is one of the most difficult standards for any leader to uphold, particularly in the international arena where public perception, national pride, and political stakes are in constant tension. The act of admitting that a correction is necessary requires humility. More importantly, it demands the ability to place long-term relationship health above short-term image preservation. In sending an envoy, the former president chose to embody this form of strength, conveying that taking responsibility, even after leaving office, is part of the moral and strategic duty of leadership. What makes this gesture powerful is that it breaks from the often combative tone of modern geopolitics, where backtracking is portrayed as a loss and apologies are seen as concessions. Instead, this move reframes the narrative. To acknowledge a misstep and take steps to address it is not only wise but a sign of maturity and moral clarity. It shows that the leader involved is confident enough to be self-aware, wise enough to value truth over ego, and secure enough to know that accountability does not diminish stature, it reinforces it. In international relations, the consequences of silence or denial can be profound. When nations avoid accountability, trust erodes, narratives harden, and diplomatic openings narrow. A refusal to acknowledge harm, even unintentionally caused, can deepen resentment and cast a shadow over any future cooperation. This is why accountability, when practiced with sincerity and courage, has such a restorative effect. It clears the air, it neutralizes suspicion, it allows for healing and re-engagement. The former president's choice to send an envoy served precisely this function. It communicated that leadership extends beyond tenure and that the responsibilities of office do not end when the term does. This act also reflects an important principle in leadership, that being right is less important than doing right. Often leaders are trapped by the pressure to defend every past action, fearing that to admit error is to appear indecisive or vulnerable. But history has repeatedly shown that the greatest leaders are those who recognize the impact of their decisions and are willing to correct course when needed. The courage to say, "We may have caused harm and we are here to address it," takes more resolve than any rhetorical defense or deflection ever could. There is also a profound sense of dignity in taking responsibility. It acknowledges the agency and experience of the other party involved. It says, "Your perception matters, your voice matters." That kind of validation can shift an entire relationship dynamic, restoring balance where it may have been lost. It also speaks to the core values of democracy and justice, the idea that leadership is accountable not only to its own people, but to the broader international community that shares in the consequences of its choices. By modeling this form of strength, the former president also sets a tone for future leadership. It encourages successors and peers to recognize that leadership is not a posture, but a practice, one rooted in reflection, humility, and the willingness to act when action is necessary, even when it is difficult or politically inconvenient. This model of accountability-driven leadership can serve as a template for how nations address past tensions, reconcile with others, and approach foreign policy with integrity and self-awareness. In a time when global discourse is often shaped by rigid stances and hardened rhetoric, the choice to take responsibility stands out as a refreshing return to principle. It reassures allies, tempers adversaries, and signals to citizens everywhere that leadership is still capable of honesty and growth. Most importantly, it restores the idea that power and accountability are not in conflict, but in harmony. Ultimately, this gesture is not about admitting defeat. It is about affirming the values that should underpin every position of influence: honesty, responsibility, and the strength to act with conscience, in showing that corrections can be made without shame. The former president reaffirmed the idea that true leadership is not defined by always being right, but by doing what is right when it matters most. In the often rigid and transactional world of international relations, gestures that carry a forward-looking spirit of cooperation can be rare, yet they are essential. The decision by a former US president to send an envoy with a message of reconciliation was more than just a diplomatic courtesy. It was a deliberate act of vision. The envoy's presence was not only about addressing the past, but about setting the tone for what lies ahead. It was a statement that despite previous tensions or misunderstandings, there remains a desire to move forward together with respect, common interest, and a renewed sense of purpose. This kind of message is vital in a global climate marked by competition, mistrust, and the lingering effects of historical divisions. By choosing to reach out in person, the former president signaled that the United States still values the relationship and sees potential for future collaboration. It was an invitation to reset, not by forgetting the past, but by learning from it and committing to something better. That commitment to mutual progress is at the heart of every meaningful alliance and partnership. The forward-looking nature of the Envoy's mission reflects a strategic understanding of how global relationships evolve. Nations may clash, leaders may change, and priorities may shift, but the need for cooperation, particularly between influential countries, remains constant. The Envoy's message recognized this. It was not about assigning blame or dwelling on previous disagreements. Instead, it focused on rebuilding momentum, restoring goodwill, and identifying shared goals that could form the basis of future progress. Such a gesture also conveys optimism, an essential yet often overlooked quality in foreign affairs. The belief that two nations can find common ground after a period of tension speaks to a confidence in diplomacy itself. It asserts that even strained relationships can be repaired when there is political will and moral clarity. It reminds both sides that there is still more to gain by working together than by remaining in conflict or disengagement. And it reaffirms the belief that dialogue, mutual understanding, and cooperation remain the best tools for building peace and prosperity. This vision for future cooperation is not rooted in vague hopes or symbolic language alone. It is built on a clear acknowledgement that both parties bring value to the table. Respect is not a concession. It is the foundation of any meaningful diplomatic relationship. The Envoy's message made that clear, signaling that the United States views its partners not through a lens of dominance, but through one of mutual interest and shared responsibility. That tone matters. It sets expectations and creates a climate where future negotiations can be more productive and less adversarial. In practical terms, hope for future cooperation means identifying areas where interests align, whether in trade, security, environmental policy, or cultural exchange. The act of sending an envoy was a way of opening that door again, of signaling readiness to discuss those issues with sincerity and a spirit of partnership. It was a reminder that even when formal agreements seem distant, the work of building understanding must continue. This kind of proactive engagement is how meaningful partnerships are formed and sustained. The message also resonated beyond just the two nations directly involved. It sent a broader signal to the international community that diplomacy still has life, that statesmanship can still rise above rivalry, and that global affairs need not always be driven by tension or competition. In a world where division and polarization often dominate headlines, such gestures provide a model for how countries can act with foresight and integrity. Looking ahead, this moment has the potential to serve as a turning point. If followed by consistent engagement, mutual respect, and honest dialogue, it could pave the way for deeper collaboration and understanding. It could help build a relationship defined not by past grievances, but by shared goals and constructive engagement. That is what hope in diplomacy looks like, not the absence of conflict, but the belief that conflict does not have to define the relationship. Ultimately, the envoy's message was an expression of that belief. It was a reminder that even in moments of difficulty, nations can choose to reach out, to listen, and to rebuild. It showed that the future of any international relationship is not predetermined. It can be shaped carefully, intentionally, and respectfully by those willing to invest in cooperation over confrontation. And in that willingness lies the enduring hope for a better, more unified future.